Can I put it on? Is it on?
It is on.
It is on, yeah. And who live through the daily reality of now where we're entering the third year, and I don't think any of us would have expected to have still been facing such a situation now, more than 2 years in. I remember meeting Irina rather early on in the war, and I don't think you or I would have imagined that we would be here today to do this. So it is a hugely depressing moment, and it is worth remembering, as Filippo has been saying elsewhere this morning already, that the recent month has been a month of great savagery for the people of Ukraine. So it's not as if it's loosening up or easing up in the slightest. It is a war that is going as fast and hard and harshly as ever. And we are still in a position where 40% of the Ukrainian population need humanitarian aid. 40% of the population remaining in Ukraine need humanitarian aid. A particular toll, obviously, on people in the front lines, naturally enough, people who have lived through these front lines for these 2 years and more. It's almost unimaginable to think of this. I remember going with Denise to Kherson a good year ago, and where Kherson had just been regained by Ukraine, but down by the river, and these poor people trying desperately to live in such desperately difficult circumstances, and now the war has taken them over again. Relentless attacks against energy, against homes, other civilian infrastructure, and it's a war which we should not forget. It is really important, and the message I think from all of us today will be, please do not forget Ukraine, while there are many other places in the world which grab our attention. And I remember being reminded of this by the very, very good Ukrainian diplomat, in fact your colleague in New York, who spoke to me some weeks ago, said, please tell the Secretary General that, please, Ukraine still needs help. We're asking for $3.1 billion, by the way, for this year. We were 67% funded last year. I was asked a question as how much of our $3.1 billion do we need? And the answer is all of it. It's quite simple. We don't put out needs which we don't think are priority needs. We're aiming for just over 8 million people of the 14, so we are strictly prioritized. Obviously the Ukrainian government and its partners are providing the bulk of assistance in Ukraine. We are very, very honored to have the relationship that we do with Kyiv and with the oblasts and with the governors around the country. It makes all the difference, as Denise knows from every daily operation that we have. And we're very grateful to you for the way in which you treat us. 500 humanitarian partners, worth remembering that the 500 humanitarian partners that exist for us inside Ukraine, in the humanitarian operation inside Ukraine that Denise runs, include over 60% of those, more than half of those, are Ukrainian. So it is not as if Ukraine is not helping Ukraine. On the contrary, when we talk about localization, Ukraine is a model of localization, so-called. So Ukrainian organizations are providing aid to the Ukrainian people. We are simply here to help them where we can. We deliver cash and large assistance. I think it's $560 million last year was delivered in cash. It was in a very effective way of delivering aid to people who we couldn't easily reach. There are daily convoys up to the front lines in areas of great danger, and thank you to the Ukrainian government as well for ensuring our safety and security for our operations. And almost all of those operations so far, touch wood, so far, not all, but almost all have been safe. So look, the needs, we are deliberately reducing the amount of money that we're asking for, not because we think the needs are diminishing or the war is getting any better for the people of Ukraine, but because we need to prioritize, because we understand well, and the people in this room understand it firsthand, that we're up in a severe competition with other parts of the world, the brutal truth of the competition of aid programs with each other. And finally, and of course I would say this, the most important objective of all is not to deliver humanitarian aid, it's to end the war so that the people of Ukraine can be free once again of the scourge of war. That must remain our overwhelming priority, and I know it is for Deputy Prime Minister Verещuk and for her government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Griffiths. Now let's turn to another side in the conflict, and that is the refugees. So far, about 6 million Ukrainians have fled the country. So let me turn to High Commissioner for Refugees, Mr. Filippo Grandi. How would you describe the situation for the refugees today?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. And like Martin, I really like to defer to Deputy Prime Minister and to Denise and to civil society representatives that really will give you a more concrete sense of the situation. But from this perspective, just to add, let us not first of all, let us not forget, full stop. I'm very worried that only 2 years, not even into this crisis, we already have to say this, of a crisis that we had to say until recently, don't forget other crises, because everybody was focusing on this one. So this volatility is a killer, literally. And I hope that this event helps, and you will help us in your capitals put it back where it should be as a humanitarian priority, among other things. It is a humanitarian priority. The last month has been devastating for civilians. The displacement volume continues to be the largest of any other situation in the world. 10 million people, 4 million displaced inside, more or less, 6 million refugees all over the world. This is still huge, 10 million people. You don't have any other situation like that. And of course it's winter, which makes it in Ukraine primarily, but also in many of the countries where Ukrainian refugees are, it makes it more challenging. The priority for the UN and its partners is inside Ukraine. That should be very, very clear. And I think this is also the priority for all the countries represented here that host Ukrainian refugees. I just had a very good discussion with the Deputy Prime Minister. We fully support her view that you need to make people strong, resilient. This is really what we should be doing, and humanitarian assistance is part of that effort. Displaced people, vulnerable people, cash distributions, the linkage in the case of displacement with solutions, with the recovery, that has been the constant message of the government. I think it's important to support that. Outside, of course, outside Ukraine, the response in particular in European countries continues to be quite exemplary. The adoption and extension of the temporary protection regime that has been decided in Europe has been literally life-saving and life-building. It's part of the same. Let's make people resilient until they can go back home, and resilient means having access to services, having access to work, and so forth. We have heard less, all of us, about Ukrainian refugees after the big outflow in 2022. On the one hand, this is good because it means that there are no enormous challenges. On the other hand, it makes me a little bit nervous because there are some challenges everywhere that need to be addressed, and that invisibility is a double-edged sword. Don't forget that the statistics are very clear. It's about half of the Ukrainian refugees in Europe in particular, of working age that are actually gainfully employed. It's about half of the children that go to school full-time. Now, we know there will be probably informal employment. There is probably a large number of children that study online the Ukrainian curriculum. But I'm just flagging that there are indicators that need to continue to be watched, especially by the host country, with the support of all of us in the aid communities, especially when it comes to the vulnerable people, to the disabled, to the single mothers. Many of them are single mothers, not all, but those that have more difficulties accessing services and so forth. Just to flag, and I'll speak about this a bit later, but we are asking for $1.1 billion. We, meaning UNHCR, is not alone in this, of course. It's we're talking about 11 countries hosting refugees. We're talking about targeting about a third of the total number of refugees through these programs. In Moldova in particular, a bit broader, these percentages, including host communities. We're talking about more than 300 partners, almost 50 of whom are refugee-led organizations. So a lot of localization, a lot of civil society involvement, which I think is important. And we're asking for $1.1 billion, which is considerably less the same appeal of last year, which was $1.7 billion, reflecting the fact that many people have access, are more self-reliant, and the respective governments in Europe are sustaining the brunt of the effort. So in recognition of that, we have also reduced. Just last point to recall, I think last year the percentage of funding was 73%, which is good as these appeals go in what was already almost a second year of operations. Please keep it up, keep it like that. Remember that we are in a dire financial situation, all of us across the world. Ukraine was an exception up to now. Keep it an exception, don't penalize the other situation, but keep it an exception, because otherwise, if also in Ukraine we have to do the cuts in operation, in staffing, in approach that we have done in other places, we will not fulfill our own responsibilities to the Ukrainian government and people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. Now let me turn to a prominent guest that we have, Her Excellency Ірина Верещук, who is the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine. I know you personally have traveled around a lot in Ukraine. You have met a lot of people. You have seen a lot of difficult scenery. Is there anything that shows that the situation is improving in Ukraine?
В Україні покращується. Thank you very much for your question. And the first thing that I would like to say is that thank you to all of you, to each of you personally, because here you have the most prominent humanitarian operators in the world, because your work has been so prominent. You are so professional, and millions of people all over the world are dependent on your professionalism, and millions of people in the world get help from you. So this round of applause is for you. And taking advantage of this amazing group of people, I would like to personally thank Martin, to you, and you know for what. On behalf of the Ukrainian government, on behalf of the Ukrainian people, we will always remember what you have done for us in May of 2022 when you helped evacuate civilians from Azovstal. Believe me, it was almost impossible, and Martin personally managed this whole operation, and he also deserves a separate round of applause for this outstanding humanitarian effort. And then the grain corridors, Martin, this is also extremely important, and I would like to also have a separate round of applause for Filippo Grandi in March of 2022 when Russians were just outside of Kiev. He was in Kiev with us, working with us, helping every day and reacting to everything that we needed at the time. And again, many thanks to Dennis Brown. When I saw Dennis for Christmas of this year, when we were celebrating Christmas at home, Dennis was in Ukraine on the front line with the Ukrainian people, helping everyone there. And I thank her for that. And responding to your question whether the situation is improving with humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, no, the situation is not getting better, but it has stabilized. It becomes more controlled, and the stabilization is because of you. We as government of Ukraine would have been in a very difficult situation without your humanitarian apparatus, without all these efforts that you have been putting, adding to what we were doing. Thank you for your amazing motivation, and you have to understand that 22 was the year of adrenaline shock that we all had, and the year of amazing energy that was accumulated, that has accumulated under the conditions that we all faced. We stood together, we saved millions, and it seemed to us that the war will be over. Just a couple of months, we stand and we win. But this has not happened, and the year 23 came, and with it came understanding that this war could be long-term. Of course, this created impression, this had feedback on the Ukrainian people and on the Ukrainian government, because resilience of people is not just soldiers in the trenches. Resilience is built by the fact that parents of the soldiers, wives of the soldiers, children of the soldiers are somewhere there, provided with support. And this is how the soldier in the trench can be assured that he does what he needs to liberate the country, and everyone else is done what is needed in order to help Ukrainians survive and build resilience. And here we are, the most amazing humanitarian operators. I don't need to explain anything to you. You understand what needs to be done. You understand how important it is to continue to support Ukraine, because the enemy counts on us being exhausted. The enemy knows that they cannot win militarily, and they really count that sooner or later our civilians will get exhausted, and we cannot allow this to happen. We cannot afford this to happen. We have to keep supporting civilians. We have to keep supporting IDPs who moved within Ukraine and people of Ukraine who moved outside, running from the war, and by that withstanding and resisting evil and oppression. Our humanitarian front that we have been holding together is of utmost importance, and under the condition of long-term war, this humanitarian resistance and resilience becomes priority. I have no doubt with Ukrainian military. I have no doubt with motivation of the Ukrainian military. But I'm really worried that civilians continue to be resilient, hopeful, and strong. It's important for us that children of Ukraine, orphans, mothers of Ukraine, families that have their fathers and husbands killed, disabled people, vulnerable people, I want all of them to know that they are not left alone, that they will continue to get help. It's very important for us that we, as the government of Ukraine, understand that we can rely on you, that we can count on you, that we know what UN or any other organizations will be doing or are doing in Ukraine at each moment of time. And believe me, we can do it. We place lots of hopes on the humanitarian plan that we will be approving today, the plan for the next year, 2024. We want to make sure that this plan works in the future, but this is only if we all believe in this plan and if we all believe in our efforts. And once again, I would like to thank each of you, all of your organizations who are helping Ukraine. Please continue to do this. Please continue to help. In the year 2024, we will see the result, and we will see the result of your amazing efforts.
Prime Minister. Let me now turn to Denise Brown, Humanitarian Coordinator for Ukraine. You have done a humanitarian needs and response plan that's based on a series of assessments. You also have traveled around the country. How do you see that the war is impacting on people?
Thank you very much. And I'd like to take you to a place you've probably never heard of, which is called Roza in Kharkiv, in eastern Ukraine. Roza is a small community of 320 people, or was 320 people, when on the 5th of October, when people were sitting in their homes, a missile landed in the middle of that small town, killing outright 59 people, so wiping out 20% of the population in seconds. Absolutely devastating, and happens almost every single day in Ukraine. So when that happens, what do we do? What do we do together? The first thing we do is what we try and do for many of these incidents, is go to those locations. So the very next day, we were there. I was there, UNHCR, WHO, OCHA, we were all there. Why? Because it's what the Deputy Prime Minister is saying. First of all, is that demonstration of support, that despite all of the other tragedies in the world right now, which, yes, looks completely overwhelming, that Ukraine is still important, that a small community of 320 minus 59 people in seconds is still important. So we go, first of all, to demonstrate that importance. Secondly, and I'd like to thank OHCHR, because we go also, and they did an excellent report on that tragic incident, it was not a military installation. There was no military installation there. It was 59 people sitting in a cafe mourning the loss of a loved one. So that's the second reason why we go. We are part of a chain. What do we do in terms of the assistance? We do that. It works. It's a very good machine. As the Deputy Prime Minister is saying, we've got the machine in place, the local authorities, the local volunteers who do an outstanding job, the national actors, the international NGOs, the UN agencies, the government. We've got that piece is set now. We respond to every one of these incidents. So day one, we're there. What are we doing? Bringing psychosocial support, immediate supplies, so people whose now doors and windows have been completely destroyed by this massive explosion, which was bigger than this room, the destruction left behind, and damages, the waves damage everything around it, immediate supplies to start those repairs. So psychosocial support, our presence, our witnessing what happened, and supplies. That's days after. Weeks after, it's rebuilding the homes. It's, in many locations, removing the rubble. In many locations, it's supporting small businesses, because that little town depended on that little cafe. It was the only source of income that they had. So all of this we can do. It's now predictable, thanks to your funding, thanks to our coordination, thanks to our network, thanks to relationship with the authorities. But it's the years after. And as Martin said, we're now moving to the third year. There's nothing left for us to repair in that community. There's nothing left for me to get my hands on. What's left behind is much harder to deal with. How do you get over the fact that there was, and still is, the playground of that community is right beside where that cafe was hit? Or the women, because I was there on Christmas Day, who tell me, I don't go to the center of town anymore, I can't. Don't forget, the missile hits, there's immediate damage, we're responding. Thank you so much for your support. In the years to come, that damage that we don't see has to be dealt with. And that's the phase we're moving into. My message is, the war is not over. The suffering is not over. We continue to require your support so that we can do the job that we have been doing. And if the funding is not coming at the level that's required, you know from other locations we will have to start dismantling the humanitarian system. and rebuilding that in Ukraine, certainly it's not me who's going to be able to do that. So all of these things we need to keep in mind as we move forward, but the fundamental message is the war is not over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have two NGOs here. Let me first turn to Mrs. Joanna Garbalinska, Director of the Humanitarian NGO Platform in Ukraine. There's a lot of humanitarian aid going into Ukraine. How would you say that the collaboration between the international community and national actors is working?
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, yes, I represent the Humanitarian NGO Platform. We're 90 members, both international and Ukrainian NGOs, and obviously we're part of a much larger humanitarian community, majority of whom are obviously Ukrainian NGOs. And we know, we've seen it, Ukrainian humanitarian actors, whether local, including local volunteer groups, youth-led or women-led organizations, are really the backbone of this response, and have been so from the very beginning. And I think we've seen a lot of investments and progress made in Ukraine towards what could be a locally led response. And this is, I think, in large part thanks to very strong advocacy from civil society that really pushed the humanitarian international community to do better. And at the same time, obviously, the international community was willing to listen and act on that. And this has resulted in actions and investments that allow us to look at how we want to measure the progress on localization, to define it locally and to ensure we have a strategic approach as a collective to this. But this is just the very beginning, and obviously this is also dependent on funding for the humanitarian response, the ability to fund local actors and to push on systemic issues within our system that maybe we thought weren't really possible before. I think if given the time and the funding and the support, we'll be able to bring and show that this is indeed possible, and also bring it to further a global agenda to strengthen localization or locally led response. And it would be really a lost opportunity if we're not able to do so if the level of funding effort is not sustained.
Thank you, very interesting. Do you see things that could be actually improved that are not working so well today? What could be done?
Well, I think obviously we've seen that civilians across Ukraine have been forced to adapt to and develop a resilience to a war, and some people even from 2014. And no one should have to get used to war. And so, as was mentioned before, the coping mechanisms people use will eventually reduce. And this is something that will obviously contribute to longer-term consequences and social issues that could take a very long time to resolve. And just an example, NGO Girls, a Ukrainian organization, did a survey, a nationwide survey, which found that half of the parents that they surveyed don't really know how to support their children through this. And 42% of adult Ukrainians do not know how to access professional help to address worsening mental health challenges. And I think this is an example, and obviously there's many more throughout the response, where we need to make sure that humanitarian recovery and development actors work at these issues all at the same time. And it can't only be the put on the humanitarian community to make sure that this is resolved, because these are also longer term issues, and obviously making sure that we work together with cooperation and support of the government of Ukraine. And just maybe a final point that I also like to highlight is that we're still facing and have not yet overcome the collective struggle of reaching people in areas that are and reaching civilians in areas where humanitarian access is not given to humanitarian actors. And I think there is something that we need to be improving on. Thank you.
Thank you. Turn to the other NGO we have here, and Miroslava Kirik, who is head of the Ukrainian House Foundation in Poland. The refugee crisis that we talked about, many countries in Europe, especially Poland, opened their doors very generous, but there are still critical needs. What do you see as the key challenges ahead?
Okay. First of all, as a Ukrainian, I would like to thank you, all of you, for helping Ukrainians who had to flee from Ukraine, from the war. We are really appreciated and really touched and really hope for your support in next years till the war ends. We all hope for the war to finish, but unfortunately we need to fight. We need to stay on both feet and till the end of the war. So please, I've joined to all the appeals set here. Please support us till the war ends. As you heard today, the sirens, and what we didn't have today, it's an attack which goes very often immediately after the sirens. We also, many of the Ukrainian women whom we help have the air sirens installed in the mobile phones. Living abroad, they are still in Ukraine, they are still in psychological distress. They sometimes even have much more psychological problems than when they are in Ukraine. They still need support, both on the labor market, both psychological support. They need to survive this war, and then they need also investment in the human capital. And what I would like to stress, what we see as an urgent need now, it's an investment in their capital, investment in the labor market. They're mainly highly educated, highly qualified, but they work below the qualifications. They work for the minimum salary because they all have life on hold. They wait till the war ends. And that's why we think it's important to invest in the reskilling, upskilling, language courses, also support the entrepreneurial capacities, because they are very entrepreneurial, and with the right tools they can be very important in the part of the European community and Ukrainian community. And by doing this, you also invest in Ukraine, because they want to return and they want to rebuild Ukraine. Next, this is education. We have 300,000 Ukrainian children in Poland. Half of them, they are not attending schools. They are in the Ukrainian online system, which is for them 4th year of online. So you understand how psychological consequences it has for them. And it's also, it could be dramatic for them to join the society, to be a part and have their careers in their life. So I think it's very important to support the returning them to school, but also what is important also for me, also as a Ukrainian, and I think for Ukrainian government and Ukraine, to be in the Ukrainian system, to provide the system of Saturday school, Ukrainian schools, or online schooling, to have this Ukraine, part of the Ukrainian identity still being preserved. We also, as a civic society, has the models how to work, how to establish schools in double systems, so we can share, but it still needs funding. The third thing, which is also very important, it's limited resources. Polish society and European society was very welcoming and support us during these 2 years. But unfortunately, after 2 years, as it was said, the topic of Ukraine is not appearing in the news, and the society is tired, exhausted. And that's why we still need to support both refugees, not those who are most vulnerable, and also those who could be a beneficiary for the society in which they are, and not to be a scapegoat sometimes in the political games, which also happens, unfortunately. It's important to support also organizations at ours, community organizations that work with the refugees. We have expertise, we have trust both from refugees, but also from the donors, from the local national institutions. We can provide support even further when the international donors are disappearing. And now we see the situation in many international organizations, one by one, deciding that they need to finish support to refugees. So it is important to keep helping us, keep helping Ukrainians, but also keep helping civic organizations. You have the list of them in the response plan. You can also support them directly, because we are really have to stand and support as much as it will be needed. We will not resign, as together as Ukrainian society as well is very resilient and stands and supports themselves. We also will support, and please help us. Please invest in this, in us, and in the rebuilding of Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. If you would just put in short word, what would you like to say to the international community and the donors? In 2 words.
Invest in human capital for Ukrainians who live abroad now, and invest and support civic societies, because we are really on the ground. We help, we know how to help, we have expertise, and we are good in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, let me turn to a very special guest that we have today, Ms. Anna Shutyaeva. You are a Ukrainian refugee. You fled from Kherson, and it was a very dramatic flight, I understood. So would you tell us about this, please?
Thank you for your questions. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And, first of all, I'm honored to be here, sharing my experience, thoughts, and emotion as a refugee from Ukraine and Romania. When you hear people talking about travel, how many countries they were to, it's usually about holidays. But our travel has been different. After the war started, we stayed home in the occupied Kherson region for as long as we could. And it was not easy to live. Even thinking about leaving was heartbreaking, but our journey was not simple. To arrive in Romania, my daughter and I had to travel a very long way. We spent 5 days in a bus that took us through 4 countries until we finally reached Bulgaria. And from there, we crossed into Romania. And there are not words to describe how lost we felt at the beginning. We were far from family and friends in a new place, new people, new language, not knowing what to do and where to go. So much uncertainty and desperation during those first days. We did not come to Romania as a tourist or as a migrant works. We were fleeing a war. I understood very fast that I must do something to make a life for myself and my daughter in Romania. Immediately, UNHCR and NGO partners helped me find the first job. And in less than a month, I was working in a hotel as a cleaner. I didn't know what to expect. I had no such experience because I have a different professional background with 2 degrees in law and in economics. But I had to go on. After 7 months, UNHCR helped me find a more suitable workplace at a large company's warehouse. It's still not according to my qualification, but working is essential for me. When I arrived in Romania, I did not speak Romanian. This was a real problem for me. Many Ukrainians were talking language classes, but because I started working very soon after arrival, I learned by myself and help of volunteers and my colleagues. Now, let me tell you something about my colleagues from Romania. They are so kind, so friendly, and they help me so much. For example, we speak Romanian, and I asked them to teach me and correct me. They show me how to do my job best, and they make this very warm atmosphere around me. They are truly like a family, and thanks to them, it's a pleasure to go work every day. Dislike them means so much when you are away from home. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Much appreciated. Now, let me get back for a quick wrap-up with High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi. What would you say in this very important refugee response plan? What are the most important elements?
Elements and maybe some concluding remarks on what everybody has said on the refugee side. First of all, elements are relatively simple. You know, we, together with all this organization, work on issues related to legal status, to particular needs that some groups may have. We support efforts towards self-reliance. I think that's very, very important when you talk about humanitarian work. And of course, and this is also an open invitation to governments and municipalities, let's pay attention to social cohesion, which will become a challenge going forward, as we heard from Miroslava, given the protracted situation. It's a highly localized, just like the other appeal, they're both very localized, to use the fashionable word, but in this case, there is a lot of capacity that we can rely on, and I fully subscribe to what Miroslava said about supporting local organization. This applies, by the way, also to the Ukraine appeal, because we can rely on very strong civil society in that respect. One small reminder to government representatives here, temporary protection, that has been really the backbone of allowing inclusion of Ukrainian refugees, technically cannot be extended, if I am correct, as of next year, as of spring of 2025. So it is important. There will be a new European Commission after the election, but it is important to start thinking about, let's hope the war ends before and people can return. But God forbid this doesn't happen. This will become an issue that needs attention going forward. Very important to see this as resilience, as Irina said, as everybody said, investment in for when people will be able to go back. So without education and self-reliance, this will not be as effective. And please, please, please don't give up. Funding is going to be a challenge. This is just the first meeting that we have here in Geneva with the diplomats and the diplomatic corps. You'll hear all of us come back to you on many other situations. Sorry about that, but you know, if conflicts are not resolved, these situations will continue. So if the war doesn't finish, we will have to continue to come back to you, and the situation is bad. My organization has cut almost 1,000 positions at the end of last year, at a time when you need strong humanitarian agencies around the world. And this is just to say that I wish I could have done it earlier, but I couldn't. But this week I'll be visiting Moldova just in a few days, and then I'll spend almost a week in Ukraine. We just heard from, we just discussed this with the Deputy Prime Minister, and so as soon as I'm back, I'll be able to share even more impressions and advice on the way forward. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Let me then go back to Anna again. I'd like to ask you, what are your looking forward, what are your hopes and dreams for the future, as the situation is now very difficult?
I'm sorry. My future. I won't say that from the first day I like Romania, but Ukraine is my home, and I liked Romania. This for the friendly and kind people, and for their culture. The people showed so much empathy towards our gift, but something more was given to us. Very concrete support from the arrival to this day, from the government, from the international organization, and so many other actors. For example, take our situation. We had no difficulty in getting our paperwork done at Rome Expo Center for refugees. We enrolled with a family doctor. We got the information we needed about accommodation and government support for renting an apartment for a few months. This was invaluable help for someone who is trying to rebuild a life. We are all very grateful for the support and want to ask you, please continue to stand with us. Looking into the future, there is still so much uncertainty. This is the truth. We have a place to live. I have a job. I made new friends in Romania. We start to build little by little a new life. We have a new life. Others people, many still, are struggling to find their way. But it's difficult for another people from Ukraine. And they have difficult with language, with found a job, with found place for kinds. And we still miss, when, you know, of course, we miss our friends from Ukraine. And of course, I miss my family who stay now in Kherson. We would love to go back, but people are still living in Ukraine. This is why we continue to need your support. Our situation is not easy, and we could on all the help we can get. You asked me about my dreams for the future. I think the future is uncertain. I wish to learn Romanian so well that I can use my degrees and work in my field while still in Bucharest. But above all, I wish the war were over and to return home to Ukraine. But here is the problem, because my home is still on the occupied territory. I cannot go back in Ukraine now. And until Romania este casa mea. Romania is my home.
Now, let me turn to Denise Brown again, humanitarian coordinator for Ukraine. What would you say as a few wrap-up comments about the situation?
We have a very solid humanitarian response in place in Ukraine. We work at scale. We cover the needs of more than 11 million people. I thought that was the most difficult part of the job. It is not. We have to respond to unexpected events like the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam, which none of us could have imagined that morning when we woke up on the 6th of June what had happened. We do frontline deliveries several times a week, up to the front line within 10 kilometers. The UN, the NGOs, and the incredibly brave local actors who work with us in the authorities. We regularly respond to incidents like Rosa, which I explained to you earlier, practically every single day, frankly. The winter, and we haven't talked about that today, the winter and ensuring that the people of Ukraine have access to solid fuel sounds like such a basic thing, and it is, but to keep warm over a very, very cold winter. What we've not talked about, and I'll leave you with that thought, we have not managed to go across the front line, and it is not for lack of trying on our part. From Martin, Filippo, Secretary General, all of us, because it is about delivering assistance to Ukrainians who are in need no matter where they are. We're prepared to go across the front line tomorrow. I'm prepared to go myself. I cannot get the authorization, the guarantees of safety and security that I require from Ukraine, yes, but from the Russian Federation, unfortunately, no. So while we are doing a good job on the territory controlled by Ukraine, that part is a big gaping hole in the humanitarian response, which all of us, including the member states, really need to be thinking through. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me turn back to Deputy Prime Minister Irina Verещук. What would you say are your final message to us all, the international community, the donors, and us here today?
I would like to ask all of you to understand that the war in Ukraine is not one more war or is not another war. This is not the next regional conflict. I would like all of you to understand that nothing like that ever happened in the world since the Second World War, and the scale of crisis, the scale of tragedy, you know it very well. Nothing like that happened before. Since the Second World War, Russia has used all kinds of weapons against Ukraine as of now, except for nuclear weapons. All possible missiles from North Korea, from Iran, everything has been used by Russians against Ukrainian civilians. 7,800 missiles have been used by the Russians to destroy Ukraine. You can imagine what it is like to have 16,000 hours of air raid alerts. 60,000 hours of air raid alerts. We have survived. 3,500 hospitals in Ukraine has been destroyed. Over 100,000 buildings in Ukraine have been destroyed. Millions of people in Ukraine have been displaced. People who lost a lot, many of them have lost their future. And the only thing that stays with us is our hope. And it's very impossible. It's very important that we all understand, because this war has a long-term nature. We have to change our approaches to make sure that our humanitarian response efforts stay long-term and stay large scale. I understand that the policy of humanitarian response is usually large scale, but it is usually short term when you react to some disaster. So when we want to help, we run and we help where we see something flooding or something burning. And usually a lot of efforts are needed to help, but in many cases those efforts are short term. But I would like to emphasize that we have developed new standards of humanitarian response, and we have to adjust all our efforts towards longer terms and longer term perspective, large scale and long term. And as a representative of a Ukrainian government, I would like to ask all of you for consistency. Humanitarian assistance that we are receiving should be more predictable, stable and consistent. And once again, we are fighting against a very dangerous enemy. Everything that Ukraine has is directed towards supporting military. Almost 100% of the Ukrainian budget goes to the Ukrainian military, goes to buy weapons that we need to win the war. And what it takes in order to support civilians, what is not priority, Ukrainian government cannot afford to fund, and military is priority at the moment. And this is why humanitarian response, I hope we will continue to support with you. We will never give this enemy a 1 minute chance to get a feeling of winning. They will never win, and we will never surrender. Thank you.
Now, Martin Griffiths, would you like to say some final words, please?
Yes, I will be brief. And actually, Irina has given me has been speaking about the words that I thought. Ukraine is different from all our many other conflicts that we see around the world. And my speaking points for this question is all about all the other conflicts around the world. So if you'd like to see me afterwards, I can speak to you about them, but I don't want to actually now. I just want to talk about Ukraine. Going into the third year of a war is a terrible moment because, as we have heard, systems have been degraded and because, as we know, attention has been diverted. You know, what is remarkable about Ukraine, I find, through these two and now into the third year of war, is that despite the fact, Irina, that you are investing your budget totally into military operations, which you have to, you're still running Ukraine. And you're still running the services in Ukraine. And they still work. And yes, of course, you are getting assistance from outside, but you are still governing that country in a way that is remarkable, given the slaughter that is inflicted upon you. And you need to be congratulated for that, and you need to be supported for that. For the humanitarians, as Denise has said, yes, we need to have a look over the horizon to see how we can support more, and her example, of course, I was so telling, so that we can support more the essential resilience of the communities that we can access. And I'm glad that Denise reminded us about all those communities we can't access. But I want to end with this, just this single point, and it is Irina's point. The Ukrainian government has enough to do fighting a war against an implacable foe. We have seen so much of its damage, and it has not decreased. In fact, it has increased, particularly recently, and there's no reason to think that's going away. We had a Black Sea operation that finished in July. It recognized the geographical importance of Ukraine for global food security, and that has not gone away. So we must stay to be in solidarity with your government, your people, your communities, and the future, so that indeed you can come back from Romania. Go home where you're needed. Hope to see you there. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all of you. Very interesting speeches and points that you made. Now I would like to go into the other section, which are statements opening up to the floor. And we have pre-registered interventions, maximum 2 minutes each. And we also have timers, as you can see on the walls here. Let me show them, put them on. 2 minutes. If you can keep that, would be very good, because we have a lot of speakers and we want to give the chance to everyone to speak and give their views. So we're going to start with the neighboring refugee hosting countries close to Ukraine. And I welcome here, first of all, the permanent representative of Poland. The floor is yours.
At the outset, I would like to thank all the panelists for their interventions and for setting the framework for this meeting. Poland wholeheartedly welcomes the joint organization of today's event by UN OCHA and UNHCR. I would like to thank both organizations and their staff for all the efforts aimed at providing assistance to more than 14 million Ukrainians, refugees and internally displaced persons, and, to a lesser extent, returnees. The launch of the Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan and the Regional Refugee Response Plan testifies to one thing that is crucial for our neighbor: that Ukraine, so brutally exposed to external aggression, does not fall into the category of the so-called protracted situations. The Ukrainians deserve better than to be the victims of the biggest Russian-induced humanitarian crisis in Europe since 1945, and this event partly confirms that the world has not failed Ukraine. Madam Chair, maintaining stable and predictable assistance to meet the basic needs of war refugees is particularly important as we approach the third anniversary of the outbreak of the war. This observation applies not only to Ukraine itself, but also to the countries of the region which host more than 2 million refugees. Among them is my homeland, Poland, who is proud to host about half of these refugees and to provide them with comprehensive assistance in accordance with the strategic objectives of both plans. That's why we are grateful to be mentioned in the latest edition of the UNHCR RRP. In conclusion, Madam Chair, I would like to thank you for presenting these two documents. Let me also express my conviction that then in the next edition of the RRP will contain a quotation similar to the one we can read in the 2024 edition. The unwavering support of Polish government and society continued in 2023 and positively influenced the lives of refugees in Poland. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I would welcome the representative for the permanent representative of Bulgaria. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam. It is now almost 2 years since the beginning of the Russian Federation's aggression on Ukraine, and we see that the major consequences of this war, the massive displacement of civilians, the growing number of civilian casualties, destruction of civilian infrastructure, and the overall worsening of the humanitarian situation in the country continued throughout 2023. It is continuing until now. We reiterate our condemnation in the strongest possible terms of Russia's aggression against Ukraine and call on all parties to fully respect the rules of international humanitarian law. Let me assure, Madam Deputy Prime Minister, that Bulgaria stands by Ukraine and its people and will continue to keep its borders open to everyone fleeing the war against your country without any discrimination. And Bulgarians admire the courage and the resilience of Ukrainian people, their sense of solidarity and national spirit. We also thank OCHA and UNHCR for their continuing engagement towards people in need and for their continuing delivery, even under very challenging circumstances, of humanitarian relief. Since the beginning of the war, 174,322 Ukrainians have received temporary protection in Bulgaria, of whom around 55,350 accompanied and 590 non-accompanied children. As per today, 69,172 Ukrainian citizens obtained valid registration cards and remained on our territory. The inclusion of persons with disabilities and the protection of children and their families are a matter of priority for my country. Further integration in the labor market, as well as a simplified procedure of recognition of high education diplomas, including medical ones, are under consideration. Bulgaria up to now has provided in kind and in financial terms humanitarian assistance worth €2,650,000 to the Ukrainian population via the EU Civil Protection Mechanism as well as via the humanitarian agencies on the ground, OCHA, UNHCR, UNICEF, ICRC and the SERF. Bulgaria will continue offering humanitarian assistance to be channeled via different humanitarian actors on the ground in 2024 as well. At this stage, we are planning to provide €150,000 for the activities of OCHA, IOM and ICRC, as well as additional assistance via UNESCO. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just remind you that the statements will be available online afterwards. Now, let me turn to another neighboring country, Estonia. Representative of the permanent mission, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all distinguished panelists for excellent remarks. As the third year of large-scale Russian aggression against Ukraine is about to start, the humanitarian needs in Ukraine remain alarmingly high. Estonia remains gravely concerned about the humanitarian situation in Ukraine as well as funding gap in humanitarian aid. We reiterate our resolute condemnation of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, which constitutes a manifest violation of the UN Charter and the cause for this humanitarian crisis. Ukrainian people have shown remarkable resistance in the face of the aggression. Yet we call for states, organizations and all other counterparts to continue and step up the humanitarian support to help meet the needs detailed in the Humanitarian Response Plan and the Regional Refugee Response Plan. Moreover, reconstruction efforts and humanitarian assistance are complementary. Sustainable reconstruction is possible during the war. For example, the Estonian-built Ovrich kindergarten opened in June and the Malin Bridge in October. Reconstruction must continue hand in hand with humanitarian assistance. Estonia has provided and will continue to provide humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. Since the beginning of the Russian aggression, our humanitarian contribution to Ukraine has totaled around €25.8 million, including €6.7 million from the public sector. Estonia is also doing its share with reference to refugee response. We are currently hosting over 35,000 Ukrainian refugees, more than 2.6% of our own population. Estonia will continue its support and will stand with Ukraine as long as necessary. Yet, to end this humanitarian crisis and its impact globally, Russia needs to end its illegal aggression. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now to another refugee hosting country, Slovakia. The representative of the permanent mission, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair, and láskavo prosím o Deputy Prime Minister and the rest of the Ukrainian delegation. And thank you very much, High Commissioner Grandi and USG Griffiths for convening this meeting and presenting the Ukraine humanitarian needs and response plan and the regional refugee response plans for Ukraine. Almost 2 years have passed, as many mentioned, since Russia launched its war on Ukraine and continued attacking this with undiminished severity. And last month's missile attack, which has been mentioned, violated any basic civility and must be condemned. And it's always tears my heart to hear about attacks in Kharkiv. I've been there several times before the war in order to start the cooperation for students and to imagine that this is a war zone, the former vibrant young city full of young people is unimaginable, and it tears my heart apart. As a result, the prospects for ending human suffering with the incoming 2024 remain bleak. Having further coordinated humanitarian and refugee responses in place is therefore very crucial. Slovakia will stay on its course of providing humanitarian support to Ukraine and the Ukrainians forced to leave their homes. The figures for the last 12 months, comprising, among others, 750,000 for the mining machinery and additional 200,000 euro for humanitarian material to be handed over this January. The total of our broad humanitarian response since February 22 has thus amounted to nearly 16 million euro. Since the beginning of the war, Slovakia has recorded nearly 2 million border crossings from Ukraine, with more than 130,000 refugees registered for temporary protection today. And Ms. Shutiaeva mentioned a very important part of this struggle to integrate the people. I can say for myself, my GP right now is Dr. Zhevska from Ukraine, and this is important that the people are integrated with their qualification, which they have, and they work in their field, which they worked before. It is also in this acute context that we offered at the last month's Global Refugee Forum a set of national pledges and joined several multi-stakeholder commitments. To close, I again add my voice to all those calling for an end to the war and for a peace respecting Ukraine's national sovereignty and territorial integrity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to have a pre-recorded video from the United States and the Deputy Administrator for USAID, Mrs. Isobel Coleman.
Good morning. I would first like to express my thanks to UN Emergency Relief Coordinator Martin Griffiths, High Commissioner for Refugees Filippo Grandi, OCHA and UNHCR for hosting this launch event today, and for continuing to lead the global response to the needs of the Ukrainian people. I also want to begin by commending all of the Ukrainian organizations, international NGOs, and UN agencies that are working day in and day out, often with tremendous risk of their own lives, to serve the people of Ukraine. We stand together nearly 2 years after the start of Russia's brutal and full-scale invasion of its neighbor. As time passes, it can become all too easy to grow inured to the devastation wrought by Putin's war of choice. Yet as we meet today, millions of Ukrainians remain displaced. Too many women, men, girls, and boys require shelter, safety, and food. And over 1.5 million Ukrainians remain in significant need in areas of their country occupied by Russia. The Kremlin's intense aerial attacks across Ukraine in just the past few weeks have reminded the world that Russia aims to continue to inflict pain, wreak destruction, and displace millions. As innocent civilians try to keep themselves and their families safe while meeting their basic needs, donors and our partners must remain resolute in supporting them, as the HNRP and the RRP outline. We must continue to strive to understand and meet the needs of Ukrainians in Russian-occupied areas. And we must continue to engage other stakeholders, development actors, and international financial institutions while continuing to work closely with the government of Ukraine. As the largest humanitarian donor responding to this crisis, the U.S. government is dedicated to meeting the objectives of the HNRP and the RRP. We urge all donors to continue robustly funding these critical appeals. We must not avert our gaze, even in the midst of other global crises. We look forward to collaborating closely and strategically with all of you in the coming year to support the Ukrainian people in their time of need. They're counting on us, and we cannot let them down. Thank you.
Very good. So now let's return back to the floor, and I will have to ask you to limit, if possible, your statements to 1.5 minutes now, as we're running out of time. So let me then turn to European Commission Ambassador. Please, the floor is yours.
A big thank you goes to Martin Griffiths and Filippo Grandi and their teams for the remarkable work the humanitarian system continues to deliver in difficult circumstances in Ukraine, Gaza and other crises. And to the Deputy Prime Minister, I also wish fully to acknowledge the role and work undertaken by the Ukrainian authorities and yourself. For the people of Ukraine, 2023 ended and 2024 began with massive Russian missile and drone attacks on civilians and critical infrastructure in the middle of winter. We continue to condemn Russia's aggression and the intensification of systematic airstrikes against civilian targets and infrastructure. The need to protect civilians is an obligation of all EU member states. 40% of the Ukrainian population requires assistance. We collectively remain the leading humanitarian donor, with Team Europe, that's the EU and its member states, contributing close to 3 billion so far, and 843 million from the European Commission alone. We have supported shelter, cash, food and protection assistance, healthcare and education in emergencies. Our support will continue in 2024, starting with 75 million euros. And just like in 2023, it will not come to the detriment of our funding for other crises. We have also, in addition to the financial assistance, opened our doors to Ukrainians fleeing the war in their country through the activation of the EU's Temporary Protection Directive. Close to 4.2 million Ukrainians are registered in the EU with access to the labour markets and health, education and social security. We stand with Ukraine and will continue to do so. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now let's go to the representative of the Permanent Mission of Norway.
Deputy Prime Minister, Excellencies. Next month marks 2 years since Russia's full-scale invasion and a decade since its illegal annexation of Crimea. Russia's continued aggression has brutally destroyed the lives of countless civilians. And now, instead of peace, Russia marked the winter holidays with a surge in attacks. We strongly commend the resilience of the government and the people of Ukraine. Let me also thank the UN, the Red Cross, and other humanitarian organizations, Ukrainian and international, for their important work. Norway's support for Ukraine is steadfast, flexible, and long-term, and will evolve as Ukraine's needs evolve. During Zelensky's visit to Oslo in December, we announced additional support in excess of 270 million euro. This included a top-up of the UN's winter response plan and support through the World Bank to keep schools and hospitals running and ensure that salaries and pensions are paid. This is an example of the complementarity between humanitarian and other civilian support in the Norwegian multi-year Nansen program. Let us not forget, this is a man-made humanitarian crisis brought about by Russian aggression. We call yet again on Russia to end its illegal war. In 2023, Norway provided approximately 248 million euro in humanitarian assistance to Ukraine and to the regional refugee response. We increased our support to mine action and to food security, as well as to the Ukraine Humanitarian Fund, which plays such an important role in strengthening local humanitarian response. We remain deeply concerned by the lack of access to Russian military-occupied areas and by the long-term impact of the wars on Ukraine's children and other vulnerable groups. In closing, and this is important, we are not smitten by any kind of fatigue. In 2024, Norway will continue to provide high levels of humanitarian support for millions of Ukrainians living under extremely difficult conditions. Our support for other vulnerable countries affected by the war will also remain strong. Thank you.
Thank you. Now let me turn to France, the permanent representative. Please, the floor is yours.
Madame la Présidente, distinguished panelists, Madame Deputy Prime Minister, first of all, a message of support of France to Ukraine. Our new foreign minister decided to go to Ukraine the second day after his nomination to express his support. We are very impressed by the resistance of the Ukrainian people and by the efficiency of its government to continue democracy despite all these destructions. Second message, we are aware that Russia did not give up neither on its military aggressivity nor on its political goals. And this is extremely important to underline. We have to be aware that the humanitarian situation will continue to be extremely acute as long as Russia will continue its military operations to that scale and will not give up its political demands, which are unacceptable because nothing can justify this aggression. And we want to congratulate humanitarian organizations for their mobilization and express again our support through the European Union, through our national efforts, because it is extremely important to show this solidarity. As you said, Martin, and as you said, Filippo, it is a matter of legitimacy for the UN to be able to go to the support of Ukraine in those times where it is very much needed. And indeed, we are acutely aware of the humanitarian needs of the Ukrainian people. It is not to exclude or include another crisis in this situation. It is to address all the humanitarian crises which need to be addressed, including the Ukrainian one, which, of course, for Europe is amongst the priorities. And finally, I would like to reiterate the fact that in 2024, France is going to be by the side of Ukraine and by the side of international organizations in support of Ukraine. There is a very simple solution to this situation. It is that Russian troops go home and that the Russian aggression stops. But until this is done, France's support will be there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now let me turn to Canada and the permanent representative. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to this very distinguished panel, because in fact you've brought us the reality of the ground here to Geneva, and welcome Vice Prime Minister. We do hear your calls not to forget Ukraine. I think the full room here illustrates just that we have not forgotten, if that is any encouragement at all. In our steadfast support for the humanitarian response, Canada has responded by committing over $350 million in humanitarian funding over the past 2 years, and that against a backdrop of much greater multifaceted support. The plans launched here today are essential for all of us as we allocate our funding going forward. But I really just took the floor to state that Canada is unwavering in its support for Ukraine and will continue to show our solidarity with its brave and resilient people. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now let me turn to the Netherlands and the representative of the permanent mission. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Chair, Deputy Prime Ministers, Excellencies. Thank you for updating us on the deplorable situation in Ukraine as a result of the Russian aggression. And thank you, Ms. Brown, for continuously speaking up about the suffering of innocent civilians in Ukraine. People inside Ukraine are battered by ongoing attacks on civilian targets. As Ms. Brown mentioned, even small villages fall victim to unprovoked attacks. Ukrainians in occupied territories are suffering from barbaric crimes of Russian forces, especially the illegal deportation of children. And also our thoughts are with the millions of people that had to flee to neighboring European countries and the uncertainty they face. Deputy Prime Minister Verещuk, we applaud the people of Ukraine for their resilience going into the third year, and would especially also like to thank Ambassador Filipenko and her team for their unwavering effort and energy to promote and defend the interests of Ukraine and its people here in Geneva. This year again, the humanitarian needs are estimated around 3.1 billion, and the message is clear: every dollar, every euro is needed. And this is not counting the immense investment needed for already undertaken recovery. And I'm pleased to hear that Ukraine is seen as a model for localization. The Netherlands will continue to stand with Ukraine, and today we pledge an additional 15 million euros to the 2024 humanitarian efforts in Ukraine through the Ukraine Humanitarian Fund. This is in addition to the 10 million euros that we provided to high quality and accessible psychosocial support for those that need it as a result of this terrible war. Because we know that Ukrainian resilience is needed now and for all stages of recovery and rehabilitation in the future. This war should not be forgotten. It's on the top of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, let me turn to the permanent representative of Sweden. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the panelists. We really welcome this joint launch of the HNRP and the RRP that clearly demonstrates the compound challenges that Ukraine and neighboring countries face. The humanitarian situation in Ukraine, as we have heard today, remains deeply concerning and motivates our high continued attention. Support to Ukraine remains a top priority to the Swedish government. Our humanitarian assistance to Ukraine due to the Russian full-scale invasion so far amounts to over 2 billion Swedish krona, or nearly 200 million euros. Sweden has also increased our attention to the complementarity between life-saving humanitarian efforts and the efforts to support to Ukraine's recovery, reconstruction and resilience. To support to Ukraine's energy infrastructure is one such example. As highlighted in the HNRP, humanitarian access remains a critical constraint, especially in areas under temporary military control of Russia. We reiterated our call on Russia to provide full, safe and unhindered humanitarian access in areas under its temporary military control, in line with international humanitarian law. Sweden continues to support a more locally led humanitarian response, and I would like to particularly commend the important work of local Ukrainian humanitarian actors that also, every day, are subject to great risk. Finally, Sweden looks forward to continuing our cooperation with donor partners to ensure a coordinated, sustained and effective response in support of the Ukrainian people. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, exceptionally, as this is an exceptional event, a very important launch, we have 10 more minutes that we can go on, and I would just have to ask you then to try to keep your statement to 1 minute, if possible. So, a lot of speakers, a very important topic. So now I would like to welcome the Deputy Permanent Representative of Germany. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Under Secretary General, High Commissioner, Vice Prime Minister, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Unfortunately, 2 years after Russia's full-scale aggression against Ukraine started, and after 10 years of war in the eastern parts of the country, there is still no end of the aggression in sight. This winter, Russia is again deliberately targeting energy infrastructure. Our short-term focus, therefore, is to provide humanitarian assistance to the most vulnerable and war-affected people in this particularly cold season. It is also important to reach the 1.5 million Ukrainians living in Russian-controlled areas. They are not forgotten. Russia alone is to be held accountable for the human suffering east and westwards of the river Dnieper. We welcome the OCHA-led efforts to reform humanitarian programming and HRPs to reflect the most urgent, life-threatening needs against a background of immense overall needs. The HNRP states correctly, the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine remains a protection crisis. Consequently, our focus on mental health and psychological and psychosocial support will remain a vital part of our humanitarian response. While the response plans predict slightly decreasing humanitarian needs, the funding gap is unfortunately increasing. Let me conclude by iterating that Germany also in 2024 stands firm on its substantial humanitarian support to all Ukrainians in their homeland and for those who have found refuge in Germany for as long as it takes. And we call on our partners to uphold much needed humanitarian assistance for Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Now the Permanent Representative of Denmark. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Madam Chair. The launch of these appeals is a painful testimony to Russia's continued brutal and unjustifiable war of aggression against Ukraine, a war that the Danish government continues to condemn in the strongest possible terms. A war that continues also to have wide-felt global consequences, exacerbating global food insecurity and affecting the most vulnerable, in particular women and children. From day one, Denmark has, together with our partners, been standing by Ukraine. And let me express our admiration and gratitude to all humanitarian workers working within Ukraine and in neighboring countries, Ukrainian civil society, for all the efforts that they're doing every day with the risk of their life. We remain committed to provide unwavering support to Ukraine in 2024. We will remain among the top contributors to Ukraine relative to our size. In this year, 24 Denmark will actually increase our humanitarian support from approximately 20 million last year to 33.5 million this year, out of a total package of a little more than 200 million euro for civilian support. Let me stress that at the same time, Denmark remains committed to respond to many other humanitarian crises around the world, and in fact, total Danish humanitarian funding will increase in 2024. So let me close by just again underlining the urgent need for international community to assist and sustain their humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. Denmark will remain a strong partner in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I would like to invite the Deputy Permanent Representative of Japan. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, it is sad to see that today's plan for Ukraine for 2024 has had been issued due to Russia's ongoing and provocative aggression against Ukraine. We strongly urge Russia to stop its aggressions immediately. Last year, as a chair of G7, Japan led discussion on Ukraine, including G7 summit at last month's G7 leaders video conference. Our foreign minister visited Ukraine and Poland this month. This is an opportunity to confirm Japanese determination to stand with the people of Ukraine and uphold the international order based on the rule of law. During her visit, the foreign minister highlighted the importance of protecting women and children, who are particularly vulnerable in conflict situations, and of ensuring human dignity. It was also an occasion to see the generosity of host countries in accepting the displaced persons. This year, our initial pledge to address the humanitarian crisis stemming from the conflict in Ukraine totaling approximately $1 billion, including humanitarian recovery and reconstruction assistance. This includes our financial contribution to OCHA, UNHCR, and IOM. Japan highlighted that at the second GRF last month, HDP Nexus approaches in connection with the various partners are needed to tackle humanitarian crisis. In this connection, in February, Japan will host Japan-Ukrainian Conference for Promoting Economic Reconstruction in Tokyo through close PPP, adding ongoing assistance such as humanitarian demining. In closing, let me express our sincere gratitude to humanitarian staff working under severe conditions in Ukraine and around the world. I thank you.
Let me invite the Permanent Representative of Spain. Please, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Undersecretary, High Commissioner, Deputy Prime Minister, let me start by thanking all the staff deployed in Ukraine with your humanitarian organizations, and also expressing our firm solidarity with Ukraine after the most recent attacks. The launch of these two plans is a reminder of the suffering in Ukraine and the need to act and reinforce our action. Spain reiterates its strongest condemnation to Russia's illegal war of aggression in Ukraine. Spain has supported Ukraine since the beginning of this aggression and has adopted the largest humanitarian package to a single country in our history. Thanks to the Spanish support, we have carried out important humanitarian interventions in education in emergency, demining activities, and also healthcare. As in other conflicts in the world, we see that the provision of healthcare and education are under attack, which is a clear violation of international humanitarian law. Spain is also committed to Ukraine's recovery. Additionally to humanitarian action, we are engaging in development interventions and as well as in financial assistance and support. Spain's society has expressed its solidarity with Ukraine. Now we are the fourth European country in terms of temporary protections granted. More than 190,000 people are displaced under the protection in Spain. 32 of them are minors. 32% of them are minors. Ukraine has also been at the center of the Spanish presidency of the Council of the European Union. As it was mentioned, two major achievements have marked this semester. One, the unanimous extension of the Temporary Protection Directive, and also the agreement of opening accession negotiations with Ukraine. The government of Ukraine, humanitarian organizations, and civil society local organizations can count on Spain's unwavering support. Thank you very much.
I'd like to go to the permanent representative of Greece. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll try to be as brief as possible. First of all, we would like to reiterate our call for an immediate withdrawal of all Russian troops from the whole of Ukraine in full respect of its sovereignty and independence. This is the most critical enabler for the reconstruction of the country. As a member of the EU, we are determined to continue our strong support to Ukraine for as long as it takes. Greece has provided humanitarian assistance, including medical supplies, both inside Ukraine as well as to Ukrainian refugees hosted in neighboring countries. We have made contributions to the UNHCR, UNICEF, and other actors providing support to Ukraine. We are fully committed to actively supporting Ukraine's reconstruction effort. We can further facilitate Ukrainian exports using the ports of northern Greece as logistics hubs. Already 53% of Ukrainian exports in terms of volume are carried out by Greek shipping. We are contributing to the preservation of Ukraine's cultural heritage, particularly in the Odessa region. Collectively, we should focus on public-private partnerships in sectors such as construction, logistics, health and pharmaceuticals, information and communication technologies to kickstart Ukraine's reconstruction efforts. Finally, Greece is organizing a conference on the reconstruction of Ukraine on 15 February 2024 in cooperation with the European Investment Bank. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have two more speakers, two more statements, and I'd like to invite the representative of Finland.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, panelists, Excellencies. Our thanks to OCHA, UNHCR, and all the panelists for highlighting the devastating effects of Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine that continues. Finland's support for Ukraine and the country's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity is unwavering. Ukraine is Finland's largest recipient of humanitarian aid. Since 2022, we have allocated over 42.7 million euros to Ukraine in humanitarian assistance. Our overall support to humanitarian aid and development cooperation funds will be 232 million euros during 2024 to 27. In 2023, Finland channeled the biggest share of its humanitarian aid to Ukraine through the OCHA's Ukraine Humanitarian Fund. We appreciate that the fund enhances localization by supporting the humanitarian work of national and local humanitarian organizations and volunteer groups, and that it pays attention to disability inclusion as a cross-cutting priority. We would like to thank the multiple humanitarian actors in Ukraine who make sure that the help reaches those in urgent need. Finland also provides protection to people fleeing from Ukraine. Since February 22, over 64,000 people from Ukraine have applied for temporary protection in Finland. My family, my parents actually had a family from Kherson region for 1 year, from August 22 until the family continued to another location when the daughters of the family continued university studies in Finland, and it's just appreciation how Ukrainians actually are able to continue their life and looking for the future. It's something to appreciate. To conclude, we, the international community, need to stay united, condemn Russia's aggression against Ukraine, and sustain our support to Ukraine and meet the urgent needs. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'd like to invite the representative of Croatia. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam. Being itself a country that experienced all the consequences of military aggression, Croatia fully understands Ukraine and will continue to provide its unwavering political, humanitarian, technical and other support. Croatia so far provided 57.6 million euros in emergency and humanitarian aid and development assistance. Our humanitarian assistance includes financial support for more than 25,000 Ukrainian refugees in Croatia. Since the mine action is a fundamental prerequisite for safe return of people and delivery of humanitarian aid and sustainable recovery and reconstruction, we are focusing on humanitarian demining in Ukraine, and Croatia's total financial support in this area currently amounts to 10.1 million euros. Last autumn, with the government of Ukraine, we organized in Zagreb international donor conference on humanitarian demining in Ukraine, and pledges made at this conference value about 500 million euros. In order to respond to worsening situation of global food security, Croatia offered its sea and river ports for exports of Ukraine grain, also within the EU Solidarity Lanes initiative. And finally, as Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine rages on, I think it could be also a conclusion of this meeting, our duty is to stand with the people of Ukraine for as long as it takes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have just made it in time. I would like to thank you all so much, and I also want to invite you to submit your statements to OCHA and UNHCR. I'm sorry we ran out of time. It was very interesting listening to you all, and I especially want to thank our panel. Very interesting. Thank you so much. All the statements will be available online. Thank you all, and also thank you all of you who follow us on webcast on this very important launch of the Humanitarian Needs and Refugee Response Plan. Thank you all.
Thank you. Well done.